Okay, we're back live this time, no recording. I have Victoria and Alexander with me, who wrote the book Locus Amoenus, fictional, and I put the word fictitious in quotes, about it's a 9/11 story, and Locus Amoenus is a Latin term, a literary term, which generally refers to an idealized place of safety or comfort, which when I read that, I said to myself, oh, so that's the Latin word for La La Land, because that's what I call it. Welcome to Organic News on Awake Radio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we said that the first thing that we were going to talk about was, because I was telling you that Professor Graham McQueen was the previous guest that I had started to play the recording, and unfortunately with all these, there's just technical difficulties in the recording, and the BUTT broadcaster that I use to, because the recording, it broadcasts pretty much worldwide, and it sometimes has interference during a recorded interview, and it makes this crackling noises. So we took it off and played Mark Passio. They're going to clean up the recording and play it next Tuesday. And so you were saying that you like Professor Graham McQueen.
I do. He is a real scholar. Before he states an argument, he backs it up with evidence. And I just respect the work that he does. He's not speculative or anything. It's very clear, very precise. He's a big help to the 9/11 movement.
And then the response that I had to you when you said that he backs up his arguments with facts was that but even the powers that be can manipulate facts and make reality almost kind of what they want it to be.
Right. Well, people have a hard time accepting new information that doesn't make sense with the information they already have. They tend to reject it as being false. And it's not that people are, willfully resisting this. It's just the way that we're made. We have a hard time accepting things to be true that we've been told over and over are false. So we can do a very good job collecting facts and arguing from evidence, hard evidence, like tests, empirical tests, the dust samples. But if people aren't ready to listen to that, they're not going to. So facts don't matter sometimes, and that's why you have to rely on things like fiction and poetry and try to get at the emotional level.
Right. It's when facts aren't good enough, that gets a little bit nerve-wracking when even just, blatant, clear evidence. I mean, we all know people even before anything like 9/11 where people, right, they just simply deny reality. I mean, that's nothing new.
It's nothing new, and for some reason we keep being surprised by the same old thing over and over again, but history keeps repeating itself. And I've gotten to a place now where it doesn't really upset me that people don't respond to facts and just don't look at them and are unwilling to read simple reports. I've accepted that that's the way it is, and I switched to Plan B.
Yeah, it's kind of like being forced to have to be on the other person's level in order to get them to swallow the medicine, so to speak.
Right, or somehow enter their context and find the thing that they can relate to. And go, find the door that will open. So.
And how did you come up with Locus Amoenus as a title?
Yeah, I'm going to use the American pronunciation because your perfect Latin pronunciation most American speakers won't be able to use. So, Locus Ammoenus will get you a copy in a bookstore. Um, I don't know, I shot myself in the foot or something choosing a name, a title that no one will be able to pronounce except for people who know a little bit of Latin. But I think you mentioned that locus ammoenus means a pleasant locale, and it's used in pastoral poetry to refer to a place where nothing bad can ever happen. And I set the story in the town of Amenia in upstate New York. And Amenia and Ammoenus are from the same word. And so I like the symmetry of that. And I wanted to tell a story about what goes on in small town America and how the results of 9/11 have played out in a little town, how that affects the agricultural industry, how it affects the schools. Because I think, sometimes for some people, these problems are too abstract. They don't involve me. This is happening on the global stage. What does this have to do with me? But these political policies that have grown out of 9/11 affect all of us on a day-to-day basis. And I start writing about the problems in the educational system in the United States. I'm a great believer in public education. Children aren't getting an education at school. And my story is about a 9/11 widow named Gertrude, whose son, Hamlet, with his son Hamlet, and they move out to the country from Brooklyn after 9/11 to try to get away from the sadness, the tragedy of those events, having lost her husband and his father. And they think it's going to be a wonderful place. They set up a sustainable farm. They're going to grow organic food. Hamlet becomes a shepherd. But they find that everybody in the neighborhood, they eat processed food. And they're not interested in the sustainable lifestyle. They don't like recycling. They don't like reading. And so Hamlet and Gertrude have a real hard time fitting in with the locals.
So, yeah, and then just reading the description in Amazon, it says Hamlet, who is now 18, is beginning to suspect that something is rotten in the United States of America, where health, happiness, and freedom are traded for cheap Walmart goods, Paxil, endless war, standard curriculum, and environmental degradation. He becomes very depressed when on the very day of the 8th anniversary of his father's death, his mother marries a horrid, boring bureaucrat named Claudius. And it's so like you described the story in this book, like kind of relating it to Shakespeare's Hamlet.
Yes, I love Hamlet. It's my favorite play by Shakespeare, and I watch it all the time. And when I was thinking of writing this novel about some sort of political corruption involved in the local levels, I was watching David Tennant's performance in the Royal Shakespeare Company. David Tennant is also Doctor Who. Everybody knows him as Doctor Who, and he's a fantastic actor. And he played that Hamlet so manic. He's glib, he's dark, he's jokey, he's running around, and he's just a wonderful, wonderful Hamlet. And that was the voice that I decided to use for my Hamlet. And Shakespeare's Hamlet finds himself in Denmark. Something's rotten in the state of Denmark. The kingdom is totally corrupt. There's spying going on. No one can trust anyone. There are murders. And I felt that that's like what it's like in America today. And it just sort of hit me. I'll do Hamlet. I'll do a remake of Hamlet. And of course, I use those characters' name in my book, but my character says that he's just assuming these false names in order to implicate the guilty. They're not really the names. But as an author, I should say Claudius, some of your listeners will have heard of NIST,
Right.
which is the organization that did the investigation of how the towers collapsed,
Right.
and how Building 7 came down. And so Claudius works for NIST.
The National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Yeah, so he's a bureaucrat, and he worked on just testing a bolt. You know, he just had to put this bolt in the furnace and watch it, and he contributed to the report, but he really didn't do anything important. He didn't do any innovative work. It was all really bad science, like a lot of bureaucratic science is. It's just a collection of data that is, a bunch of measurements taken on the wrong things. It doesn't really matter what's measured, just as long as lots of measurements are taken. And they put all this data in this report and publish it, and it bores the people to death so that they don't read it to find out that, in fact, NIST never investigated how the towers came down.
Right, they fill it with a lot of, preservatives, kind of like the outrageously obese neighbors that they find when they move upstate.
Yeah, people are eating junk food. They're taking in junk politics.
Right.
They're listening to junk science.
Right. That's what I call like the media sometimes is genetically modified. So much just. I mean, almost everything is has been genetically modified. It's like you can't get anything to just be natural today.
Yeah. I a large part of what I do in the novel is talk about what's going on in the food industry, because Hamlet and his mother are trying to run a sustainable farm, and she tries to get the local schools to have a farm to school program, and just trying to get anybody to examine the facts about processed foods and the need to eat organic. It just falls on deaf ears, and it's really quite funny.
Does Monsanto come and try to take her to court for their seeds blowing on her farm?
No, but that kind of absurdity. I mean, it's impossible to read the paper or listen to the news without thinking it's some sort of parody of the news. I mean, surely things are not that bad. I read today that a judge in Mexico overturned the ban on Monsanto in Mexico. Now, here's the place on the corn, Monsanto's corn. Now, here's where corn originated in North America. We're going to eliminate all these varieties of organic and natural corn down in Mexico because Monsanto wants to come in and put the small farmers out of business. And my novel is a parody, it's a satire, it's a comedy. And the reason why I can write a comedy about the tragedy of 9/11 is because, I know that sounds awful, but the world has just gone insane.
Absolutely.
And when things become that absurd, that's the perfect time for parody and comedy. And I feel like it's a moment in our culture when artists and writers and musicians can now rise up and start a new culture, begin a new direction in the way we think, because it has gone so far in an absolutely ridiculous direction that it can't go any further now. It can't possibly get any worse.
We hope not.
Maybe just a little bit. Yeah, I almost look forward to some sort of economic collapse, which is inevitable.
Yeah, I've actually discussed with some activist friends of mine to try to push it along somehow. Like, instead of, because we feel sometimes that being activists is actually preventing the collapse, that maybe we should, I don't know, join the other side and push it along so that it'll collapse that much faster, and then maybe people will, like listen to us then.
Yeah, they, I suppose it's not very easy to keep control of and manipulate something so complex as a global economy. So I hesitate to say, the people in power are trying to do this or that, because they can't really control it that well. But maybe they are sort of doing the boiling frogs approach. They're slowly putting the public in massive debt.
Right.
And the experiments that we see in Greece, Puerto Rico, Italy, Spain to some extent, Cyprus, these are experiments to see how that will play out and whether or not they can do that on a larger scale. And I'm sure the people in Greece didn't realize what was happening to them. They were brought into the EU under false, right. and then they have this enormous. They get all these programs, and then they have this enormous debt, and they have terrible military expenses, and they don't even realize that it's not their fault.
Right. Well, I like we spoke a little bit earlier, and we were talking about how it just is like this large abusive relationship that people have with now the corporations who have taken over the government, which and so many people have just adopted this, the lesser of two evils kind of thing, as if to say, right, like, so I have a choice to, to marry this, this abuser or like a child molester. Which one do I pick?
Republican and the Democratic Party. Yeah, I'm absolutely no longer interested in our politicians anymore. I'm an advocate for direct democracy. I think the time when we needed representatives is over. We now have the ability to communicate instantly. And if it weren't for the fact that we don't have a free press and we have generations of completely uneducated people who have lost the ability to think critically, if not for all that, I think direct democracy would work better than a representational government. Just because, when you have representatives, they can be bought, blackmailed, or sold.
I along with, the family system, like, I just feel like there's no more just real leadership in the system anymore. I mean, for decades, I always kind of tried to be that sort of parent type person and get people to do like what was good for them, like what was fit for them.
Yeah.
Just physically and also emotionally. And, sometimes being the parent and the responsible one, you don't always, get, like the best, responses from people. But ultimately, I believe that people do appreciate when you are ready to be the one to be the parent and to be the real leader. They appreciate it. I think a lot of people do.
I can sympathize with you. My Gertrude character is like you, I guess. She tries to help out the people in the area by telling them how to eat healthy, and it just goes nowhere. And she discovers in the end that obesity is a lifestyle choice for these people, and she had no idea. And so she sort of gives up, trying to, she tries to give up trying to be the parent, I guess, to help all these people and show them what's right. And she thought they just needed a little bit of guidance. And so she gives up on that. And I sort of feel that too. It's experience is something that you can't teach. You can help people learn, but you can't teach. And I guess that's why fiction works well to give someone that experience. You can live through someone else's experiences. You can live vicariously through fiction. You can put yourself in someone else's shoes. That someone with whom you don't really agree politically, at least you can experience their side for a moment. And I think that is a good way to learn something rather than be taught. So I go back and forth between sort of giving up on, trying to do the right thing and to help other people or be an activist or something like that. But I have this impulse, I guess we all do, something like Mother Teresa impulse. We just can't help ourselves. We have to try and save the world.
For me, I just feel like I kind of inherited it. I think in listening to a radio interview that you did, I heard you say that, the young people today, because, right, you and the interviewer were talking about, young adults reading your book and how the youth of today are kind of really rejecting, what the parents were trying to pass down. Like they feel that, they have no future, like they can just feel it, like even if they don't know, right, necessarily, like I did when I was growing up, like I didn't necessarily know about the Fed or Wall Street or, environmental degradation, but you can feel it in your immediate surroundings that you're experiencing sort of the microcosm of the macrocosm.
Yeah, I have a 12-year-old boy, and so I know a lot of other 12-year-old children, and they're all reading dystopia novels, these 3-volume series, and it's just and also they're reading. These kids are reading. When I was a teenager, reading was not really very popular. But I see it coming back, and it's coming back on its own. Just, I guess, because these children want to escape into these worlds where they're absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
They've inherited disaster from previous generations, and they get to be the heroes to escape from this dystopia or save everyone. And so I'm optimistic about this younger generation. I know a lot of negative things are said about today's generation, but some of the kids that I know, I think they're gonna do something. Maybe.
So how did you and what made you write this book on this particular subject? Like, how did you get involved in 9/11?
I really didn't mean to at all.
Like, what was it that made you
Yeah.
question the official story?
Well, I have a friend who's a poet. I worked in New York City at an arts foundation for years, and we supported poetry. And he was someone who's associated with the foundation there. And I ran into him, and he told me that he had collected a dust sample on 9/11, and he sent it in to some scientists who were looking to test it. At the time, there was a lot of talk about what might have been in the dust as far as being a health hazard and whatnot. And he sent it in, and it came back. It tested positive for incendiaries. And that is big news. That should have been in the papers. So I got the paper and read it. And in the work that I do, I'm a philosopher of science as well as a novelist. In the work that I do, I'm used to reading these scientific papers. So it was easy for me to understand, easy for me to see that they followed the scientific method. They did the test properly. They presented their conclusions, and then they asked the public and other scientists to test those conclusions to see whether or not they're false or true. And no one has tested them. And that's just inconceivable in science that could come out, that paper could be published. these conclusions were found. This is how the tests were done. No one is trying to verify or falsify those tests. What is going on? Something's going on. And my friend, Tom Breidenbach, the poet, found himself ostracized at the college where he worked and ridiculed for being associated with the truth movement. And all he did was find this dust sample and send it in. So
there are those pesky facts again.
So Tom's story really affected me about, how he's talking with colleagues and all of a sudden they start laughing at him, and it's heart-wrenching, really. Well, so in my story, young Hamlet, when he is 10 years old, he's at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge and he witnesses the towers coming down, and afterwards he gathers up a sample of dust, just as, just kids do that kind of thing. And then his science teacher comes along, Mr. Horatio, takes the thing from him and puts it in a plastic bag just because the kid seems traumatized and won't let go of the dust. And he takes Hamlet home, and then he forgets about the dust sample. And Horatio sends the dust sample in to be tested. And so now it's 8 years later, and Horatio comes up to Amenia to visit Hamlet and give him the news of what's been found in the samples. And of course, this is like in Shakespeare's play when the ghost the ghost of Hamlet's father comes to tell Hamlet that he's been murdered. And then Horatio and Hamlet try to do all sorts of things to find out whether or not Claudius is really guilty in any kind of conspiracy, or is he just being played like other people, or is he just a fool? Is he just going along with it?
What kind of reactions do you get when you go to bookstores and have readings and book signings? What is the
Although when I had brought up this topic with a couple of colleagues of mine, I got the same kind of thing, ridicule. But when I sent people my book to read, I sent it off to a couple of friends, people I knew in literature, and they just absolutely loved the book and thought it was completely important and were convinced that the government had not handled the investigation the way they should have.
Right.
And so I'm amazed at the difference between the reception of, on the one hand, my presenting the facts of the dust samples. My friend Tom had this test done, blah, blah, blah. People reject that completely. But if I say the same thing in literature, it gets in somehow. It gets in. They entertain the idea. And then the idea starts to grow a little bit, and then they start thinking about it. And they say, yeah, this happened. This is awful. We need to do something about it. So it's just a complete different reaction that I'm getting now. And people, I go to bookstores, and there's a little article in the local paper wherever the reading is being held. And, some journalist of a small town paper reads it, writes about it, loves it, has no idea that there's a controversy around this, has never heard that, they shouldn't be talking about death samples. And it's just amazing. This is a wonderful way to get people to start talking about 9/11 again.
Right. So, you posed it in a much less, direct, threatening way by getting them to look at other more, taking the first step, which is what I feel that the AE 9/11 Truth people did when they started looking at Building 7. And then also, now this weekend they're having the symposium on hr14.org and releasing the 28 pages. So yeah, it's like getting people to stretch themselves a little bit at a time instead of maybe.
Yeah. And I don't know how I feel, but most people have heard about the truth movement as 9/11 was an inside job. I don't know how true that is. I don't know how true it is that we have a government to have done these things. I think the people up there in the positions that we call, congressmen or presidents or whatever are just puppets. They are not in control at all. And for years, we have allowed private intelligence companies to spy on everyone in America for years, even before 9/11.
Right.
And everyone in America includes our politicians too. Our politicians have been spied upon for decades. They are not free to do as their constituents ask. They are controlled by the intelligence industry. And the intelligence industry also has a say in our foreign policy. The intelligence industry provides the intelligence. This is what's happening in this country. This is what we need to do about it. We need to send all these weapons to kill all these people.
Yeah, you talk about the military-industrial complex in your book.
Yeah, if I'm going to point a finger at anybody, and I don't, I'm so uninterested in revenge or justice or really finding out the truth, who actually did it. I think it's enough to realize that this system is so corrupt that we are never going to untangle everything, and we just need to simplify things. And also, it appears you mentioned the 28 pages, which are 28 redacted pages or classified pages from the Bush administration, discussing the extent to which the House of Saud may have financed the alleged hijackers. Clearly they did, from all the evidence that we do have. We don't know what else the 28 pages might say, but the Saudi royals also have a role in our intelligence industry too. There are a lot of foreign nationals involved in our intelligence industry, and that's probably not a good idea.
Just last Tuesday, I interviewed Mark Klein, the AT&T, the guy, the tech at AT&T. And he was saying how the relationship between AT&T and the NSA began in 1985.
Yeah.
And so, right, I mean, clearly that's way before 9/11, and clearly could have prevented it if they're saying that they need to be doing this to be like. I mean, what was right? Like, what were they doing it all the way back then for? And it clearly did not prevent 9/11.
Right, clearly didn't. Yeah. I don't know what to say to that. People, this idea that people will be safer if somebody else is watching every move they make. I don't feel safe.
I just was reading from Truthdig, a Chris Hedges article, "The Enemy is Within." He writes some good stuff, and again, just like the military-industrial complex again, and the endless wars, and it's just the never-ending profit. No matter what the cost. I mean. And they keep the propaganda going. They glorify the wars. They make the public feel like they're un-American if they question the wars. They demonize these Muslim people who never posed a threat. And it's about oil, and it's not about keeping anybody in this country safe, and it doesn't keep us safe. It actually does make us much less safe.
Yes, we've learned that throughout history, the demonizing of our enemy. The Germans were our enemy. They were terrible. The Japanese were terrible. And it's like in George Orwell's 1984, where they just keep, flip-flopping, changing the name, and, they just keep the war machine going at all costs. And, now ISIS is the new Al-Qaeda, because the Al-Qaeda brand name got a bit tarnished because everybody was realizing the extent to which the American government was supporting Al-Qaeda. And Saudi Arabia was also supporting Al-Qaeda and now ISIS. But I looked in even if you look at a mainstream newspaper like the New York Times and you look at the comment section, the mainstream newspaper is, of course, spouting the official warmongering propaganda. But in the comment section, people are awake and aware and angry. And there are a lot of articulate, well-spoken people making comments. And I think that America could be changing. It's just that what do we do? Nobody wants a revolution. I certainly don't want I don't want war. I'm a pacifist. I don't want guns. So I think our only solution, and I write about this in the novel, there is another town, although in Armenia they've gotten everything wrong and everything's just a disaster. A little bit further north, there's a town, it's an imaginary one, where everything is done right. Everything is recycled. The corporations there are all cooperatively owned. The schools are where the younger kids are taught by the older ones, and the children are allowed to decide their own curriculums and follow their interests and their curiosity. And guinea hens roam the streets to clean up all the ticks so to avoid Lyme disease, and the hospital sells sliding scale memberships. Nobody needs insurance. And, they have their own currency. And basically what this town is a completely local town, decentralized, self-sustaining community. And we see this all over my area in the Northeast in New England, communities deciding that they want to just eat locally, that they only want to buy local products, and artisans are coming back. And I think that is the only thing that we can do. That's the only power that we have, is powers as consumers, if we stop buying their stuff.
Right. John Perkins says that a lot, like always, encouraging people to vote with their dollar, like let the corporations know that you're not going to buy their products if they don't pay fair wages to the people that make the stuff. But I hate to sort of say it, but I don't think a lot of people care. It's like they want to buy these products, and they don't care like where it's made or who's making it, or I don't know. Like I've gotten that response from some people when I try to like say, hey, do you know where that comes from? But that's what he advocates, and he's going to be one of the keynote speakers this Saturday in New York at the hr14.org, and he's going to talk about a new book called New Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Oh, good. I think that's the only power we have. The hardest thing that we have to contend with is the fossil fuel industry, and I still drive a car that uses gas. So I'm still contributing to our demise. But I've researched alternative fuels, and my next car, I'm going in that direction, and we all have to start thinking that way.
Right.
And I'm also doing something locally with recycling the waste in my small town so that we can produce our own methane locally for our own natural gas out of waste. So those are the kinds of things that we need to do. And people are doing them all over, and it's starting a little bit. If we have an economic collapse, those kinds of projects will really blossom and go forward.
Someone on the chat is asking if you have a view on the Federal Reserve Bank and what would you do about that?
Well, there's not much that I could do. I guess alternative currencies. What I would like to do, what I would like to see happen, is that the Fed be nationalized. I believe that if they, we couldn't do that right now because there's too much corruption, and the last thing that you would want would be a national bank in the midst of such corruption. But if you had, let's say, state banks that were owned by the state, then instead of loaning money to venture capital corporations, you could create money to make capital improvements in your state, like build high-speed trains, put in free cable for everyone. Things that would improve everyone's lives and improve the economy. And that kind of creating money wouldn't cause any inflation. Right now, the Federal Reserve, as you know, makes money out of thin air.
Right.
And that creates inflation. But if you create money and then use it to make capital improvements, that doesn't cause any inflation. And, wind farms, solar fields, we could actually print money to create those things.
I was going to ask you a question because, it's a holiday weekend. I spent Saturday and Sunday at a friend's house in Long Beach, and they're not really like activist friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can be really challenging to be, around people that don't really practice activism or any kind of alternative ways. And so, we were using these, like, not paper plates, but like styrofoam plates, and I'm trying to be as sort of, polite as I can to do my share. Like, I didn't eat meat, everybody else was eating meat. And I rinsed off these styrofoam plates and I kept them. And this is what I do whenever I have like a takeout container, I rinse it out and I bring it home and I put it in the recycling, and everyone else is just throwing these. And I don't think these styrofoam plates are recyclable anyway, but I'm going to put it in.
You use them a couple of times before throwing them away.
Right. I mean, even my coffee cup from the 7-Eleven I keep and bring it home.
Yeah, well, this is the stuff of comedy. This is, when you first mentioned the styrofoam plates, I was jokingly about to ask, "Oh, did you rinse them?" And
yeah,
because I totally understand. Yeah, we are absurd people because we care about the environment and we try to do even these small things, and it's funny. That's the stuff of comedy because you're a sane person living in an insane world. And so what you do seems crazy.
I mean, it's been that way ever since I was really young. It's like, I won't get into that subject, like, the family system, but so that's what happens. It's like, we're bringing in, new human beings, children, the youth that are healthy and vibrant. And if a parent is not healthy enough, they can feel extremely threatened. Like, that vibrancy can be threatening to a parent, which is kind of like what I experienced. So it's like the more unhealthy the environment, right, the more threatening the healthy and vibrant, full of like life person becomes.
Yeah, I think in my book I write about how the school system is sort of like industrial agriculture in the way that they've got their domesticated animals, fattening them up and, completely taking them out of an environment in which they can learn. They just, eat the food that's put in front of them and they don't have to, interact with nature at all. And, that's what we have. One of the going back to mentioning appearing to be a sane person in a crazy world seems to be insane. Shakespeare's Hamlet, of course, is all about this idea of, is Hamlet really crazy? Because the world has gone crazy, and he is trying to deal with that. And since nobody else understands this, terrible corruption that he's found out about, everybody just thinks he's crazy. And of course, that's what is said about conspiracy theorists. They appear to be crazy. And some readers also think that my Hamlet really has gone mad. And I don't know about you, but sometimes maybe you feel like you have.
I think this system drives people mad. Like I was, again, listening to, I think it was Democracy Now!, and they're talking about the prisons and solitary confinement. And she played this recording of this one guy who spent over a decade, I believe, in solitary confinement. And he said that, he believes that they're trying to drive him mad. Like the whole point of prison and solitary confinement is to drive the prisoner mad.
Well, everyone knows that's the outcome of that extended solitary confinement. So of course that's what they're doing. It's just unbelievable, the number of people in the United States that are locked up. I don't know how we get up and look at ourselves in the mirror.
Right. And locked up, not just in prison, but in this outdoor prison also. Like, I feel like out here isn't necessarily freedom. It might be a more sort of free range prison, but I feel like, it's a prison out here also.
Yeah. A lot of those, I have chickens, of course, on my farm. I do have a farm. I live on a farm, and I've got sheep, and I grow most of my own food. And the free-range chickens are still confined to a rather small area. And a real free-range chicken gets to roam around and eat bugs all day. So.
And I also, I feel like our society is kind of turning people into almost like a animal kind of slaughterhouse where, like human beings just don't get to go through their natural growth process. Like it gets interrupted. You don't get to grow organically.
Right.
Children are forced to grow up like much faster than, nature will, can keep up. So much stress is put on them that much earlier, and the connection, the bond between like parent and child, sometimes I don't think is so healthy.
Yes, one of the things in my novel Hamlet is homeschooled. After a while, Gertrude gives up. She thought at first that a good school is what you make of it. But she had to take him out, and one of the, so she homeschools him, and I decided to do that because I homeschool my son too. And what it has done for me is it helped me keep my education going, and I'm reviewing all my math all the time. And some areas of science that I don't specialize in, and so it's a wonderful thing for a parent to have to teach a child, and any parent can do it because there's so much information available free on the internet that any parent could be a teacher. And I don't know really why we send our children off for, it's somebody else's responsibility to teach our children, and we give up this wonderful opportunity to continue our own education.
Right.
And so, I'm an advocate of public education, but I think it deserves looking at again and just asking ourselves, why did we want to do this originally, and is it working, and could we do things a little bit differently? I think that parents have to be more involved in their children's education.
Right, and not send their children off to a system to raise them also, not just educate them, but raise them.
Yeah. Ideally, I would want to see public schools turned into community learning centers where the whole community actively participates in learning.
Right, because exactly. I mean, it's not as if the parent doesn't need to continue learning also, because why is it so difficult, to get people to accept the facts and the reality of what's going on, is because, like their parents and the system did to them, which is to just raise them just enough, to be able to just have a job and pay your bills, and that's it. And then a lot of people, they don't grow after that. And I encountered a lot of issues with that in my life, because I kind of knew that we weren't really being raised to our full potential. I mean, most people don't, they're not raised, and they never get to reach their full potential, and they have no desire to, it seems, which I don't understand.
Yes, the educational system is a key to, before we can do anything to change society. And these days, most people think that education is to prepare children for college or career. My idea is that education prepares one for the voting booth, which is to say, teaches critical thinking, not what to think, but how to think and how to ask questions. And you can't control how much, you can't train a child to make a lot of money. Some people are going to make a lot of money, others will not. But everybody needs to have control over their lives, and to be able to think critically, and to be able to process information that they get from advertisers and news, and to be able to understand their world. I mean, that's what education is for. It's not an economic issue. It has to do with happiness.
It's a health issue.
It's a health issue.
I speak to, and I've interviewed a few times, Mark Paxil. He's got a website that's called whatonearthishappening.com. And I really enjoy talking and interviewing him, because we get into, discussing the family system. And, like, that's what I've studied all my life, like relationships and fitness. Like, for me, like, it comes down to fitness, and, a parent, like, helping a child to be fit and being this healthy person, this stable person that a child, has to someone there that they can push off of. Like, when a child has someone sturdy that they can push off of, it helps them to sort of, gauge where they are in life. Kind of like we do when we learn how to ride a bike. It's visceral. It's something that you have to go within to do. When we're teaching a child how to ride a bike, right? Like, we want them to go within and find it within themselves. And that kind of an experience shouldn't end after you learn how to ride a bike. That's how every experience should be. You should, right? Like,
that model of parenting is, enabling learning in the child, and providing stability and safety and so forth. And I think we spoke earlier about the analogy between government and a parent. Government takes the parental role, and the public sort of has this dysfunctional role with its government now, and is enabling this abusive behavior. But what we have with this parent is an authority figure and top-down control. We don't have true democracy where the people, or the children, depending on how you're taking the analogy, are enabled to think for themselves, and to take care of themselves, and to work out their problems. As a philosopher of science, what I have worked on most of my career is the phenomenon of self-organization, where bottom up control and bottom decision making on the global level tends to form the most healthy kinds of organization. And top-down control tends to be too rigid and too formulaic and will eventually break down. And I think that's what we're seeing with our system. There's too much of an attempt to control things from the top by a very, very few.
Right.
And eventually, hopefully, there'll be an emergent phenomenon from the democracy, from the people, and the people will, when you get a new kind of social order, it can emerge rapidly and spread very quickly. So I hope.
I hope it comes soon. We have about 1.5 minutes left, and so I write blogs frequently talking about there's just like a war against nature, a war against health and natural law, and natural law and health and critical thinking and smart people are just the enemies of the never-ending military-industrial complex and their profit.
One of the things that we can do to begin the healing process is through art, music, visual art, and literature. And that's why I wrote this book. I think that the public needs this kind of thing. I think that is where people can start looking at things from a different perspective. And I hope your listeners will go out, buy the book, Locus Ammoenus, Victoria and Alexander, read it and give it to a friend, and ask them to give it to somebody else, and give it to somebody else, and spread this new perspective so that we can start getting better.
Yeah, we definitely need healing. I want to thank you so much, Victoria and Alexander, and your book, Locus Ammoenus. See, now I'm not going to be pronouncing it as good as I did before.
Pronounce it any way you want.
So, hope to meet you someday.
Great. Thank you so much. Good talking to you.
You too. Bye. Okay, so thank you for tuning in. That does it for this Tuesday, September 8th, Organic News on Awake Radio. Please look up hr14.org. If you can, if you're in New York City, please come to the I think it's West Side Presbyterian Church on 86th Street in Amsterdam all day on Saturday, and they're also having events on Friday at ae911truth.org. And please go to Democracy Chronicles and support Cat Waters, Cat's Paws journalism, revolutionary journalism, because it does take funding to keep the truth alive. Thank you for tuning in. Good night.